Friday edition of PFT PM, 5 for 5 on the first week of our 5-week PFT Live hiatus. Plenty of you would like to see more Macy and less me. She is not in the room today because Mommy is home. When Mommy's here, Macy is with her wherever she goes. When Jill is not here, that's when Macy wants to be in here. So maybe one day next week, you'll get to see Macy again, and we'll give her a little more screen time. She seemed to be happy with her performance yesterday. Maybe next time around, you actually hear her bark, and she has quite a potent, what do they call it? Bark box? I think that's what they call it. Regardless, let's get to the news of the day. And this was one of those mornings where when I woke up, it's like, what the hell am I going to talk about for 30, 40, 50 minutes on PFT PM? We have a couple of things that have occurred this morning that become very relevant for our conversation. We'll start in Buffalo, where the Bills have announced extensions for both Coach Sean McDermott and GM Brandon Beane. The timing, curious. The motivations, possibly fortuitous for the Bills at a time when the pressure is mounting on the team in the aftermath of everything that happened last week with Stefon Diggs. This is a public show of support for the current power structure in Buffalo as a season that will be packed with pressure approaches. How the Bills feel on the back end of this season may be different. I take you back to last year, what happened in Arizona with Coach Cliff Kingsbury and GM Steve Keim. What happened? Contract extensions for both of them. An impression created that they're both safe beyond the 2022 season. What happened when the 2022 season ended? What happened? Anyone? Bueller? They both got let go. And there's a way the dominoes fall in Buffalo that after this season, a change is made. We don't know how the dominoes are going to fall, but even with these extensions, which simply took contracts that ran through 2025 and bumped them through 2027, we don't have access to the language. We don't know if the guarantees apply for 2026 and 2027. That's a device that is not all that uncommon now. It used to be that every dollar of a coaching contract was fully guaranteed. We don't know, and we won't know. But if the goal is to reduce some of the pressure that we all believe existed in the aftermath of the weirdness from last week with Stefon Diggs, maybe it works. And I think for a lot of people in the fan base who don't pay really close attention to all of the granular nuances, the easy reaction is, hey, fine, ownership's fine, no problem, no issue. I still look at this from the perspective of a Bills fan, though. You've got Josh Allen. This is year 6 for him. At what point do you have to do more than just knock on the door? At what point do you have to kick the door open? And at what point do changes need to be made to allow the Bills to kick the door in, specifically an offensive-minded head coach? Look at what happened with Brian Daboll. They did a great job with Allen for a couple of years. He's gone. Now Ken Dorsey is the guy who's got to get up to speed and make the offense work. And what's Stefon Diggs supposedly upset about? The offense. It's not an offensive head coach. You're going to have a revolving door. If things go well, you're going to have a revolving door. If things don't go well, you're going to have a revolving door at offensive coordinator. It's another one of the reasons why I'm a firm believer that teams, especially teams with franchise quarterbacks, you want a coach who will be there year in and year out, building the rapport that layers onto itself season after season after season. Sean Payton, Drew Brees, 15 years being tied together. By the time you get year 2, year 3, year 4, you're so much better from the standpoint of understanding how the offense should work. The coach understands the quarterback understands the coach. There's nothing new that needs to take everyone back to square one. That's a reality. And that's nothing against defensive coaches. It's a recognition of where the game currently is. You need a franchise quarterback, and you need to get the most out of that franchise quarterback. And so far, the Bills have not done it. So I don't think this means anything other than nothing to see here. Bills are telling the world nothing to see here. There may be something to see after the season, but for now, there's nothing to see. It's the same vibe we got last week when they mended fences with Stefon Diggs. Nothing to see here, even though there was plenty to see between Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning when Sean McDermott eventually said nothing to see here 24 hours after he said he was very concerned that Stefon Diggs wasn't there. And I wonder what Diggs thinks of this. I wonder how they explain this to him, because it was Kirk Cousins getting an extension in Minnesota that was, by all appearances, the trigger that got Diggs to tweet his way out of Minnesota. That was the final straw. Apparently, if we look at the timeline, if we trust the things we've kind of heard behind the scenes over the past few years, that affirmation of Cousins was enough to get Diggs to say, I'm out. Is this affirmation of the coach and the GM something that Diggs will react to in similar fashion? He's always good for a few cryptic tweets. And I think it makes sense to check Twitter over the course of the next 24 hours to see if there's a cryptic tweet from Stephon Diggs that would express something from him about his feelings on the situation. Because remember how this all happened. Monday of last week, he shows up for a physical and for meetings in advance of mandatory minicamp, meetings with the coach and the GM. Tuesday, meets with the coach and the GM again, and then he's gone. We were led to believe he basically stormed out. He goes to social media and posts something about people telling lies, and then the next day, the toothpaste is back in the tube. Was he told to leave after maybe raising his voice, maybe acting in a manner that a head coach would regard as disrespectful? We don't know, and we won't know. But maybe we will know what Diggs thinks about the extensions given to McDermott and Beane today by the Buffalo Bills. Maybe there will be a cryptic tweet that we can try to analyze over the weekend. If so, thank you in advance, Stephon, for giving us something to write about during what really is the low water point for the NFL news cycle. This last Monday in June that's coming up, that week going into the 4th of July, usually there isn't a whole lot that happens. So I will not complain about anything that may fall out of the sky to give us something to discuss. One last thing about this Bills extension. And I pause not for effect, but because I want to choose my words carefully here. But the lawyer in me was alarmed by something contained in the statement from the Buffalo Bills as it relates to Sean McDermott. Sean is a proud, Christian, determined man. That's what Terry Pegula said in the statement. And I understand that there are very strong Christian beliefs that permeate football organizations, top to bottom, in the NFL. I understand that. I understand that Christianity is the predominant religion in the United States of America. I get it. But there are also some pretty clear laws that protect those whose beliefs are not conventional. And I can't help but wonder whether or not this statement was run by the Bills in-house or outside legal counsel, because if this had crossed my desk, man, I got a change to make to your statement, Mr. Pegula, if you don't mind. You're paying me to help keep you out of legal jeopardy. I would suggest that maybe we remove the word Christian, because it carries an implication that we only want Christian coaches, Christian general managers, Christian employees. I mean, think of how it would look if it said, Sean is a proud Muslim determined man. Sean is a proud Jewish determined man. It would stand out to a lot of people as odd. Well, to anyone who's Muslim or Jewish, having the word Christian in there stands out. It feels exclusionary. It's a factor that has no relevance whatsoever to someone's coaching ability, someone's job performance, none whatsoever. And it's a protected class under state, federal, and local law. It's a mistake to shine a light on something like that. What if it said Sean is a proud white man? It's just as bad. These are protected categories: race, age, religion, gender. It's just something that was alarming to me. And also, I don't see anything about Brandon Beane being a proud Christian determined man in the statement. I wonder what Brandon thinks. Hey, Sean got called a proud Christian. I didn't. I'm always on the lookout for unforced errors and things that could cause legal problems later. Boy, this is just bad from a PR standpoint and a legal standpoint, because the next time the Bills are looking for a coach, if there is a non-Christian under consideration and that person doesn't get the job, this statement announcing the extension for Sean McDermott becomes Exhibit A if there is any legal proceeding. Because nobody ever comes out and admits that they hired someone because they were Christian, or didn't hire them because they weren't, hired someone because they were white, didn't hire them because they weren't, hired someone because they were a man, didn't hire them because they weren't. They never admit that. Those cases end right away. In the rare instance that you have that kind of smoking gun with the bullet exiting the chamber on film, that rarely happens, and those cases resolve immediately. When you have to prove one of these cases, and this is the work I did when I was practicing law, you have to rely upon circumstantial evidence. You have to weave basically a tapestry together of statements and comparisons of how people who fall in the protected class are treated versus the people who aren't in the protected class. They get excuses made. The example is made of the person in the protected class. That's how you prove it. When you've got something like this, proud Christian determined man, if there ever is a lawsuit against the Buffalo Bills alleging that they did not hire someone for a key job because of their religious beliefs, it's going to be a problem. And regardless of whether or not the Bills end up in some sort of legal predicament, what are we doing sending these messages? Should we not be sending messages of inclusion regardless of these characteristics? Did I think we've evolved to the point where we can agree that they don't matter? They shouldn't matter? So why does it matter that Sean is a proud Christian determined man? Why is that even worth pointing out? It has that implicit effect of making others feel excluded. All right, I'll move on, lest I go woke and go broke. And while I'm here, nobody can define what woke means. Well, regardless, in the absence of a definition, let's just treat everybody equally. And let's accept everyone for who they are and give everyone fair opportunities for the same jobs. And when we apply labels like that, what it does is it sends a not so subtle message that we are looking for a certain type. We are looking for a Christian, not a non-Christian. It's just something to keep in mind as things continue to move forward. The Commanders' sale moves forward. July 20 is the date on which the owners will convene for the meeting at which at least 24 of them will surely vote in favor of moving on from Daniel Snyder and moving forward with Josh Harris as the owner of the team. The earlier report from Ben Fisher of Sports Business Journal as of last night was it was either going to be July 20 or August 8. They really wanted to get it done July 20. They want to get it done before camp opens. And I was told earlier this week that whether or not we see the Commanders as the hard knocks team, they're one of the 4 teams that can be quote unquote forced to do it, although no one's going to force anyone to do it if they don't want to do it. But my understanding is if the Commanders are asked to do it, they'll do it. They're not going to ask them to do it until the sale is finalized. Now, even then, it gets a little hairy. If you're going to tell the story of the Commanders fresh off the sale of Daniel Snyder, how do you avoid? How do you handle? How do you treat the Snyder exit? And look, they call it a reality show, but it's not a reality show. It's whatever reality the NFL and NFL Films and HBO choose to show us. It's edited. It's sanitized. They're not going to delve into the specific reasons why Daniel Snyder isn't there anymore, but I think they'd be content to just say he's gone. It's a new era. We're not going to look in the rearview mirror. We're looking forward. We've got a new owner. We've got a new beginning, a new era for the Commanders. And my understanding is they wanted to get this done, this sale concluded before they would consider selecting the Commanders either for preseason Hard Knocks or, remember, new tradition now, in-season Hard Knocks, with the Colts and the Cardinals as the 2 teams that have been the subject of that series. The Commanders could be the in-season Hard Knocks team if they are not the preseason Hard Knocks team. And the one last point here, this issue of the Josh Harris bid having to be massaged, having to be rectified as it relates to some of the financial specifics. As the values of these teams keep going up and up and up, it's going to be harder and harder to find individuals who can afford to write a check for 30% of the team. You got to show up for a $6 billion transaction. You got to show up with $1.8 billion in cash, a giant bag of money with $1.8 billion in it. No loans for that amount, no debt, no leveraging of this asset and that asset. You got to have $1.8 billion in cash. And there aren't many people who can show up with $1.8 billion. And for Harris, it took a little effort to make everything work the way it needs to work. As these franchise values go to 7 and 8 and 9 and 10, who's going to be the person who can buy 30% of the team right out of the gates? That's going to be a challenge for the NFL, and that's going to open the door to changes in the way that teams are owned. Private equity funds may be involved to some degree for an investment at some point. The NBA is now going to be considering that as the Qatar Investment Agency tries to purchase a piece of Monumental Sports and Entertainment, which owns the Washington Wizards. The NBA is going to have to cross that bridge. The NFL at some point, I think inevitably is going to have to deal with that. And it all comes down to money. It always does. Whatever your beliefs are, whatever your position has been, whatever your rules are, if somebody shows up with enough cash, things will change very, very quickly. So I don't know who's next. The Seahawks will be sold at some point. There's no specific timeline for Jody Allen to sell that team. She will do so inevitably at some point after May of 2024, because that's the point at which an obligation to pay 10% of the proceeds to the state of Washington disappears forever. But there's no deadline. There's no process for forcing a sale at some point after that. They'll wait for the right moment. Look at the way franchises have appreciated. Last year, the record was $4.65 billion for the Broncos, now $6 billion, new high water mark for the Commanders. What's it going to be next? And when will there be other owners who maybe weren't inclined to sell, who think, maybe this is a good time to turn this asset into cash. Maybe this is a good time to cash out and walk away. And how many people are out there who can do it? Jeff Bezos is hovering. And I really do think at the end of the day, I think Jeff Bezos decided, if I'm going to buy an NFL team, why am I going to pay $6 billion for one of the fixer-uppers? Why not pay a little bit more or a lot more for, a completed mansion where everything's fine, where I don't have to go in and play this stadium game and try to repair the damage that Daniel Snyder did? Why am I going to do that? Why not just buy one of the teams that already has their act together and maybe go make some owner who isn't inclined to sell an offer he won't refuse? So I don't know who's going to be next, but we've had 2 sell in consecutive years, and who knows? Who knows? Seahawks, who knows? Bezos wants a team, who knows? Big bag of money, 100% of it he'll be able to pay for without all of this getting partners and putting up prospectus together to try to lure people to invest. No, he'll just buy the whole damn thing. He won't have to worry about limited partners. He'll own 100% of it, and as it continues to appreciate, he enjoys 100% of that increase in his original investment. Next up, the NFL Players Association, due to elect a new executive director next week. This is something that most of you don't care about, but it's fascinating to me for one very important reason. When you think about how any organization with elected representatives operates, or at least should operate, the players vote every 2 years on who their representative is to the NFLPA Board of Player Representatives. And those are the individuals. The representatives from each team are the individuals who will vote on the new executive director. At some point, I think it's important for the rank and file, the people who are the constituents for the Board of Player Reps, to know who the candidates are. There's a very small group of people who know who the candidates are for the position of executive director of the NFLPA. You'd think at some point they're going to let the rank and file know, and maybe they won't. There's a degree of secrecy here that is troubling to me, because in the absence of any transparency, it makes me think somebody is up to something. Somebody's trying to pull an inside job here. Somebody's trying to do something that they don't want any meddling teenagers to get involved in. Now, I've had it explained to me that, well, you've got individuals who are in consideration for this job, and it causes potential issues with their current employment. You maybe don't want your current boss to know you're thinking about trying to get this job. And at a certain point, you just got to declare yourself as a candidate. At a certain point, you're running for office. You can't hide it forever. You can't make it a secret in this setting where the 50 players on a team vote for a representative who then votes on who the executive director will be. To just tell the representatives isn't enough. At some point, you got to tell the people they answer to. Now, what the union benefits from here is the players just don't care. See, they don't care. If they cared, they'd know. Collectively, individually, they just don't care. So they're able to run this in a way that keeps it a secret until we know who the new executive director is. But boy, there's going to be a lot of questions to ask about this process. And I look at it this way. If the members of the union don't care, why should anyone else care? Well, it's still a fairly important job. And for those of us who rely upon the broader NFL ecosystem, I want to be reasonably confident that everything's kind of on equal footing and that the union is properly positioned to push back when need be against the league. And the league is properly positioned to defend itself against the union. It was the 2006 CBA that threw everything out of whack and made the owners determined to lock out the players in 2011 and push for a deal that the owners wanted because they thought the 2006 deal was so bad for them. You never want in a setting like that, one side to feel like it got a raw deal, because that makes that side eventually determined to do whatever has to be done to get a better deal later. Now, we've learned back in 1987, the players aren't inclined to strike because they don't want to go without their game checks. And frankly, I'm surprised the league doesn't push even harder than it does, given that the league will use the nuclear option, but the players never will. Still, I think it's important for anyone who cares about the NFL, anyone whose living is derived directly or indirectly from pro football, to be concerned about whether or not a proper balance is in place between the league and the union. Because if it gets out of balance, it can cause all sorts of problems, including games not being played at some point during the period of the calendar where games should be played. We almost had it happen. We lost one game in 2011, the Hall of Fame game, to the lockout. We haven't had regular season games disappear due to labor unrest since 1987, before that 1982, and I just like to not have it happen again in my lifetime. 2011 was a lot of time spent covering a lockout, and it wasn't fun for me and it wasn't fun for you, and I just hope that the union and the league are in a position where they can hold each other in that right balance where it never gets to that point ever again. One last topic before I answer some questions. Miles Simmons and I spent the entire first block of last Friday's PFT Live discussing MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred's idiotic remarks when he came out and said what we know all owners and commissioners believe. At some point, a community has to come up with free money for a stadium, or that team will go to a community that will come up with free money for a stadium. Manfred was asked about his remarks in London. There's a game that's being played there. I think it's Cubs-Cardinals. I think it's Cubs-Cardinals. I don't know. It's a game in London. Let's just stipulate that. And he was asked if he had any regrets, and he tried my comments were taken out of context game. And this just drives me crazy, especially the smarter and more accomplished someone is. I have even less patience for saying my words were taken out of context. Here's what it means to take someone's words out of context: to isolate quotes in a way that completely undermines their meaning. If you isolate a quote in a way that's consistent with the broader conversation, you're not taking their words out of context, you're just isolating the quote to the words that matter. And that's all that happened to Rob Manfred. His words weren't taken out of context. He said that Oakland had not produced any viable solution, which Oakland vehemently disagrees with, and they laid out how they tried to keep the A's in town. And then Manfred said that the community has to support the team, not meaning show up and buy tickets and attend the games. You got to pay for the stadium where the games are going to be played. And that's where Manfred and NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell are in two different worlds, because Goodell would never say that. Say what you will about Roger Goodell, but he knows how to handle himself when it's time to talk. He knows how to say something while saying nothing. He knows how to stare down those reporters and give them a non-answer and filibuster his way through it and just wait for the next question. And given that it happens in a press conference setting, there's never an occasion, rarely an occasion for the next person to ask a tough follow-up, to not let him off the hook, because the next person is there with his or her pre-written question, usually on some other topic, aimed at giving the commissioner an out. A one-on-one interview with a skilled questioner, you don't wiggle off the hook that easily. That's why we rarely see many one-on-one interviews with the commissioner, with a skilled questioner who would not let the commissioner wiggle off the hook. Press conference, it's so much easier to just jump from topic to topic and never be pressed on some potential logical flaws in that thing you just said. So that's one of the reasons why he makes so much money. He's very good at being the pincushion. He's very good at being the face and the voice of the owners. He's very good at being the one who stands up and defends unpopular decisions, unpopular policies, unpopular strategies of those who pay him. And Manfred's got a lot to learn when it comes to what to say and when to say it about the way the sausage is really made. We all know how it gets made, because there's always going to be a city out there that doesn't have a major league team that is willing to pay taxpayer money in order to get one. So the teams that are faced with a situation where they're looking for some taxpayer money, you better come up with it, because somebody else will if you don't. All right, question time. I have one I want to get to first, and I've actually done a little work on this. Let me find it. It's a question about Kyler Murray. It comes from J.C. Carm. If the Cardinals were to move on from Kyler Murray, would his contract be an impediment? Yes, it would. Look, I don't think anybody thinks they would move on from him this year. They're all in with Kyler Murray, even though it's unclear when he's going to be healthy. If they would bottom out, and when you consider that they also have the Texans' first-round pick, and nobody expects the Texans to be great this year, they're in position to get the #1 overall pick and select Caleb Williams from USC if they want him, assuming he wants to play for them. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but with the NIL money, and given that he's going to have some cash in the bank, he's got more power than most #1 overall picks would have. So maybe we see the next guy in a very short line that goes Eli Manning, Bo Jackson, sort of John Elway. So Kyler Murray has $46.291 million in money he's received that hasn't hit the cap yet after this year. If he would be cut with a post-June 1 designation before the 5th day of the league year next year, when another $30 million becomes fully guaranteed, another $30 million, 2025 compensation becomes fully guaranteed 5th day of next year, league year, beginning in mid-March. If he's cut before then with that post-June 1 designation, the Cardinals would carry $13 million in cap space assigned to him for next year and $33.3 million in 2025 in dead money. Now, it doesn't cost them any money. It's cap dollars that are otherwise tied up that you don't have to spend. You've already spent the money. So I think that what the Cardinals could do, if they decide after this season that they're moving on from Kyler Murray, they would cut him whatever that 5th day of the league year would be, March 20, March 21, March 19, before that $30 million fully vests. Now, if they're really concerned about getting something in return for him, you would trade him, unless you're willing to take the full $46 million cap hit next year, you trade him after June 1. That's a possibility as well. They could still trade him like the Falcons did with Matt Ryan and take that huge cap hit all at once, one fell swoop. They could take a $46 million cap charge next year and just boom, there it goes. So that's a possibility as well. And it'd be easier for them to do because they took the full DeAndre Hopkins cap charge this year. So they didn't kick any of it to next year. Maybe that's why they didn't kick any of it to next year. Maybe they're thinking, you know what, if we're going to trade Kyler Murray before June 1, we're going to take a $46 million cap charge for him next year. But remember, cap charge costs nothing. Cap charge for a team that is extremely careful with its money, i.e. cheap, cap charge is a good thing because you chew up cap space without spending a single penny. So it's not impossible next year. It would cost a lot from a cap space standpoint, but that might not be an issue for Michael Bidwell and the Arizona Cardinals. They might welcome that. And when you consider they would be swapping out Kyler Murray for a guy who would be under a rookie contract, you're not paying a ton of money for Caleb Williams or whoever they would draft to replace Kyler Murray if they decide to do that after this year. I think it's something we just can't rule out because, number one, the Cardinals have been more than a little dysfunctional in recent years. And number two, we saw them do it with Josh Rosen. 1 year after they drafted him, 10th overall, they traded up to get him in 2018. And they cut the cord after 1 year and went to Kyler Murray. You've got a GM now that didn't draft Kyler Murray. You've got a coach that didn't draft Kyler Murray. And they could decide after this year, if they're in position to start from scratch with a new quarterback who could be a franchise guy, they could move on. Oh, and by the way, think back to what was going on last year with the whole homework clause. I mean, there's some tension there. It could be, regardless of what the Cardinals decide after this year. It could be that after this year, Kyler Murray says, I want out. He could be the one to initiate it. And frankly, when you consider the current state of the relationship, the current state of the team, wouldn't be hard to blame him if he decided he wanted to get to a team where he actually has a chance to maybe compete at some point for a playoff run, possibly a Super Bowl appearance. We'll see how that plays out. All right. PFT PM policy. Would it be easy in theory to rig a game? It would just take the commissioner telling a head referee he likes Skittles, i.e. it would be better for this team to win, and it would be done. The ref would pick up on the hint or a number of other ways. And the like Skittles comment comes from what I always say is the billionaire's privilege, that if you're an owner of a team, you never have to say, go draft this player. You just make it known. And the example I give is, and I usually use Snickers or Twix or something like that. If the owner likes the candy that's in the bowl when he walks through the door to the facility, all he has to do is say, I like this candy, and that candy is going to be everywhere. You don't have to say, go get the candy, because everyone's paying attention to everything the billionaire owner says and trying to glean from it what the billionaire owner wants. So if the commissioner would say something to the head ref, there is no head ref really, but yeah, in theory, that's how it would happen. But I think the problem is it would be impossible to keep it quiet. Too many people would know about it. At some point, somebody's going to say something. That's why I think the NFL doesn't rig games. I don't think the NFL is sufficiently competent to pull it off without someone finding out about it. And they understand what the consequence would be of something like that getting out. And really, do they care? Do they, they care about having all the best quarterbacks available. And we see that, they look the other way on holding. They look the other way on left tackle and right tackle starting into their pass block stance a little early to give them an advantage against defensive lines that generally right now are better than offensive lines. That's a point that Chris Sims made last year when we were trying to understand all the nothing the passer calls. They want the quarterbacks to be available. They want the games to be exciting. They want the points to be scored. They ultimately don't care who wins. I don't think they do. And I think they have sufficient self-awareness to realize if they tried to push it a certain way, it's going to blow up in their faces. Another one from PFT PM Posse. We've talked about no trade clauses being pointless for franchise quarterbacks because no one will trade for them if they don't want to play there. So why did Jalen Hurts give up money to secure a no trade clause with the Eagles, assuming he did? I don't know that he did. I don't know that he gave up money. I think sometimes it just looks good. It sounds good. It's part of the commitment the team is making. We're not even going to approach you with the possibility. You've got full control over where you go. It's not even going to be an issue that is ever discussed between us. We want you. We believe in you. We will not trade you without your permission. So I don't know that there's a dollar value attached to that. I do know this. I think Jalen Hurts was very motivated to structure his deal, either him or his agent were motivated to structure the deal so that he would be the highest paid player in NFL history on new money average. And he was for about, 3-4 weeks, if that long, before Lamar Jackson jumped him. And when you look at the two contracts, because remember, Jalen Hurts still had a year left at fairly low money. When you add the 5 new years at $51 million, compare that to Lamar Jackson, 5 fresh years at $52. Lamar Jackson makes more in 5 years than Jalen Hurts is going to make in 6 years. So regardless, though, setting all that aside, someone believed it was important for him to be the highest paid player on new money average, and he was for a short period of time. And the no trade clause, I think, is just window dressing toward that end. Mr. Palmerson, what would be a good deal for Saquon Barkley and other running backs? Well, I think, which ones? Josh Jacobs, I don't know. Let's just focus on Saquon Barkley. The problem is the way that you take a franchise tag and turn it into a long-term deal, that would be $22.2 million fully guaranteed at signing over the first 2 years of the deal. We've talked about that before. I'm not going to bore you with the details any more than I already have. Is that enough for Saquon Barkley? See, the problem with the franchise tag for running backs, it's held down because it's determined by 5-year average of the 5 highest paid players at the position. And they smooth it out. What's the percentage of the salary cap the 5 highest paid running backs have consumed over the last 5 years combined? When you don't have a lot of highly paid running backs, that number stays down. And that number's actually gone down in recent years. And when you have a truly great running back like Saquon Barkley, 10.1 is a low number, a very low number. So when you take that number and use that as a starting point for a long-term deal, you're not going to have numbers that you should have. I think for Saquon Barkley, it should be between 25 and 28 million fully guaranteed at signing. We'll see if they do it. They've resumed negotiations, but that's the problem. The usual formula for taking a franchise tag and turning it into a long-term deal doesn't work for Saquon Barkley because he's better than the tag. With Josh Jacobs, if I were him, I'd be at least a little worried about the Raiders possibly rescinding the tag because who's going to pay me $10.1 million in late June or July or August? With Barkley, I think if he suddenly became available, he'd do better than 10.1. I think that there are teams out there that believe they have their depth chart at tailback in order and then would feel otherwise if Saquon Barkley were suddenly available. Tony Pollard is the other of the 3 franchise tag running backs. He realized back in March, I better accept this before the Cowboys realize I ain't getting 10.1 million anywhere. So he was smart to accept his tender. Josh Jacobs is taking a little bit of a risk, especially with Dalvin Cook out there. Saquon Barkley, he's good to go. The question is, what more can he get and how long will he hold out to get what he wants? Alex Bindrup, is there a bargaining chip or leverage the players could use to get all grass fields? If not, could it be something negotiated in the next CBA or some other path that would encourage owners to make the switch? Look, even though the next CBA isn't due to be negotiated until early next decade, the league and the union can and sometimes do reach agreements on all sorts of things. I mean, after the 2020 CBA was negotiated, they had to basically go back and renegotiate it to account for the impact of the pandemic. You can reach whatever agreement you want. The question is, what do the players have that they would give up to compel the league to say to the owners who don't have grass fields, you're going to go get a grass field, and it's going to be a great grass field, and you're going to spend this much money maintaining it. I don't know what the players currently have that they'd be willing to give up, but that's how collective bargaining works. You just don't say, I want this, and they say, okay. You say, I want this, and then they say, well, okay, fine. For this, I want that. That's how bargaining works. So to change the status quo, to get to the point where the league will mandate all grass fields, at some point, the union has to give something up. It's not an ideal process. It's hard to make win-win outcomes work because the league and the union don't think of it as, maybe this is something that would be good for me too. They think of it as, this is what they want. If they want it, I need to act like I don't want it so I can get from them something that I want. So the best outcome in a situation like that is to come up with something that the other side could give that actually does kind of help them too. And that's how you craft a win-win. And it's delicate and it's potentially awkward. And there's going to be a new executive director as of next week running the charge for the union. And as of now, we have no idea who it could be. Tommy Caruso, kudos to the Vikings for paying off their stadium debt early. Why don't more teams and owners do this? They clearly have the funds, and it would put them in the good graces of the fans, taxpayers, who are the ones that will save money in the long run. Well, Tommy, you're assuming that the Vikings just showed up and said, you know what, we're in a good mood today. We're going to pay off the debt. We had a good year. We're going to just do something we don't have to do. We're going to write a check to pay this off. Whatever mechanism they put in place worked better than expected. That's why it's paid off. This isn't, hey, you know what? The Vikings had a pretty good couple of years. They're paying off the mortgage early, baby. Yes, we're going to burn that mortgage tonight. It's been good here. No. Whatever they put in place to pay off the bonds worked better than expected. So they got lucky. They got lucky. Or they were smart. They picked a mechanism that they believed would over-deliver, but it was structured in a way that people thought it's going to take longer than it did, and it creates the impression 5-6 years later that, hey, everything's great. We paid off our debt early. It's not the same as paying off your house early. Not even close. Dr. J, 144, I've heard you say players are stuck with the kangaroo court and the arbitration system because it's collectively bargained, and the NFL won't concede that for nothing. Why do non-players, John Gruden, Brian Flores, others, put up with that, though? I'd want to be able to use the court system. Here's how it works. For the people who aren't unionized, for the coaches, you get given a contract on a take it or leave it basis. And how badly do you want the job? There's only 32 of them. Everybody wants one. It's the lifelong aspiration. Are you going to say, when it's time to sit down and sign the contract and everybody's feeling good, everybody's happy, no one's thinking how this is going to go sideways later? Oh, there's this clause in here that says any and all disputes, claims, grievances, etc., that I may have against the organization, its successors, its heirs, its assigns, all the legal mumbo jumbo. I have to take it to arbitration. And the arbitration will ultimately be resolved by the commissioner or his designee. What are they going to say? You know what? I don't like that clause. I'm going to disrupt this very positive vibe we now have as we're embarking on this new relationship, and everything's going to be great, and we're going to win Super Bowls, and you pay me a lot of money, and I get to be a head coach. I'm not going to agree to this clause. I'm going to push back and run the risk that they say, well, you know, guy who we were going to hire to be our coach, we're just going to move on to the guy who will sign the agreement as it's written with that clause in there. I mean, they call it a contract of adhesion. Basically, it's take it or leave it. And no one's going to say, I'm not signing the contract because of it. That's not the way the human animal works. John Gruden's not going to say no. Brian Flores isn't going to say no. None of these guys are going to say no to a clause that potentially is going to force them into arbitration. They'll worry about that later. Because that only happens if things go sideways. It's not going to go sideways because I'm a good coach and it's a good situation and everything's going to be great and everything's going to be positive and everything is glass half full. That's why it happens. Now, for Gruden, it's a different situation because he's not suing the Raiders. He's suing the league, and the league is trying to bootstrap a very convoluted argument together under the Constitution and bylaws that his claims should go to arbitration, and I think the league is going to lose that. But for Flores and Steve Wilkes and Ray Horton, there's arbitration clauses in the contracts they signed that are problematic. And what they're trying to do is fight this whole process, this whole idea that the commissioner could ever be objective, could ever be unbiased when handling a dispute involving one of the entities that hire him and that pay him. I've said this before. Why do you even want that burden? To have to try to be objective and fair, unless you want it so you can rig everything in favor of your benefactors. That's why he wants it. He doesn't want it because he welcomes the challenge of being truly fair and possibly having to go to one of his owners and say, you, sir, were incorrect, and I am exercising fully and faithfully my duty to say so, even though it's against my financial interest. Baloney. They want the system to be rigged. They want to be able to circle the wagons and say that the team is right. They're not going to announce to the world that, you know what, we got 3 teams that engaged in racial discrimination here. They're going to announce to the world that everything was fine, that they're wrong. That's why they're fighting so hard to keep it in arbitration, and that's why Brian Flores and the other plaintiffs in the case that's pending against the league are fighting so hard to get it into court. And it should be in court. It should be decided by somebody neutral. It should not be decided by the secret, rigged kangaroo court that the NFL wants for all disputes involving it, because it wants to win, it wants to keep all the dirty laundry secret, and it wants to continue into perpetuity having that system in place. Paul Zulak, the NFC East has not had a repeat champion since 2005. Do you think the Eagles snap that streak this upcoming season? Well, yeah, I do, but you know what? It's not going to take much slippage to open the door for someone else. I look at the Eagles and 49ers as the best 2 teams in the NFC, but injuries, a couple of bad breaks, Cowboys, Giants, Commanders. Yeah, I mean, it's not a lock. I think the Eagles will win the division again, but it's not a lock. We always think that this is one of the challenges of picking playoff teams as the season approaches. We know that the turnover is roughly 50% year to year, but good luck pegging the teams that aren't going to make it back. You know, if you get very creative and say, well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to identify half the teams that aren't going to make it to the playoffs. I'm going to do that ahead of time. I'm going to get it right. You know, if you do that, there's a chance you're going to pick the half to make it back that don't make it back. The half of the teams that you leave out are the ones who do make it back, and then you end up being a complete moron. I think that's why when it comes time to do the preseason predictions, far more often than not, the people who are expected to make those predictions go with the chalk. They go with the teams to get back because that's our most recent memory. We saw those teams in the playoffs. We saw those teams do well. It's hard to project teams slipping. It's hard to project other teams rising, but there's always the darlings. The Detroit Lions, everybody's going to put them in the playoffs this year. They're going to be the predominant choice to win the division. But who knows? Who knows? But it's popular to swap out Vikings for Lions. So I would assume most people who prognosticate will do so. Matt Bostic, best NFL books to read this offseason. Well, I would say Playmakers. I'm not right. I don't read a lot of NFL books because I get my fill of the NFL every day in my regular job. I'm reading still, working my way through JFK and the Unspeakable at the recommendation of Christopher David Sims, the only book he's ever read in his entire life. And it takes some time and it takes some patience, but it delves into who killed JFK and why. It's been fascinating, although it has been slow. I like to balance nonfiction against fiction. I've been reading Lonesome Dove, which is 325,000 words. It won the Pulitzer back in 1986. It's a Western. It's very good, but it's also very long. And I don't carve out like an hour to read. I'll read in 5 or 10 minute increments. You know, while I'm outside waiting for the timer to go off so I can flip the chicken or the steak over, I'll read some of the book on my phone. Whatever moments I can capture, I'll get a little bit done. I'll get a little bit done. I never just say I'm going to go read, which keeps me from getting books done as quickly as I should. What else do we have here? This one's interesting from @WorldChimp. When is the NFL going to combine AI with the voice of John Facenda and produce new material? That would be awesome. That would be incredible. It also would be controversial. And I wonder what compensation would flow to the estate of John Facenda if they decided to go ahead and do that. But I'm sure that on the way in, John Facenda signed all the contracts and gave away all the rights to let them use in perpetuity anything and everything. But that's twice I've said perpetuity in the last few minutes. Anything and everything he ever said to reconfigure it, to re-engineer it, to remaster it, and augment it with AI. I think that would be awesome. Aaron Jaeger, I'm sure you've answered this in the past, but I'm a newer listener. Why did you switch careers? Well, I did it for the money, frankly. You know, I practiced law for 19 years, and there are other reasons. I'm being somewhat facetious, but what happened was I practiced law for 10 years, and then I kind of stumbled into this business in 2001, and it was a hobby at first, and didn't make any money for 3 or 4 years, just did it because I enjoyed doing it, started to make some money. The first watershed moment was 2006 when Sprint became our first sponsor, and the money was significant enough that I thought 2 things. One, I need to start curtailing the cases I take on. I need to be extra selective in which cases I'll accept because there's a decent amount of revenue that's going to come from Sprint, and I'll put more time into PFT. And when you put more time into it, what happens? It grew and it grew and it generated even more money. So it was kind of a balance where less time practicing law, more time in PFT. And then the second watershed moment was NBC shows up 2009 and says, we want to partner. We want to license your content. Here's what we'll pay you. And all we ask is you stop practicing law. And it did not take much for me to decide to abandon the law practice. The law practice was going well, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of stress. It's fighting all the time. And when you can come out of it in a better financial position and what you do every day is the thing you enjoy doing, you don't have much stress. Rarely is there much stress. The days are not exhausting. I would come home certain nights from practicing law and I'll still have stress dreams. I had one last night that I was practicing law again. I would come home some days and I would just collapse. I'm just done because you're constantly on, you're constantly thinking, you're fighting. When you're in a deposition that goes all day long, if your client is being questioned, you have to listen to every single question. What objection am I going to state? What do I have to do to protect my client against this onslaught? When you're the one asking the question, it's all day long of constantly looking and probing and thinking, and it wears you out mentally. It wears you out psychologically. It wipes you out emotionally, and that never happens here. Now, in season, it's a different existence, especially on game days at NBC. Those are long days. They start at 7 a.m. They go until after midnight. We have, especially late afternoon when the early games have ended, I slip into overdrive to figure out who do I want to get on the phone? Can I get them on the phone? What am I going to ask them? What am I going to draw out of that conversation that I can synthesize into something that would be informative and entertaining for Football Night in America? But that's a shot of raw adrenaline that lasts from about 3:30 until we go off the air. And that's fine because that's 18, 19, 20 times a year, one day a week. That's nothing, because that little snippet of stress that I deal with on Sundays during the season, that used to be like a common occurrence, 1, 2, 3 days a week, all day long when I was practicing law. So yeah, I did it for the money. I also did it because I'm a lot happier doing this, because it really isn't work. It's the thing that I enjoyed doing. It was my hobby and it became my life. And I have no regrets whatsoever. And I would never, ever, ever go back to practicing law. I don't care. I don't care what someone would offer me. If someone would say, hey, we'd like you to dust off your license and come in and handle this trial. I don't care what. And I say all the time, there is a price for everything. There is no price that anyone would ever offer me that would get me to do it ever, period. End of statement. I'm done and I'm never going back. I probably should be done here. It's almost noon already. That hour flew by, as it always does. I want to thank you for hanging in there with us for the first week of the PFT Live hiatus. 5 for 5 on PFT PM. I can already tell you next week I'm not going to go 5 for 5 because my annual physical is next Thursday. So I'm not going to do it next Thursday, but we got Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Wednesday. We got Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday of next week. We'll try to go 4 for 5 next week. We'll be posting all weekend long at profootballtalk.com. We'll have clips from today and clips from throughout the week and whatever news comes up. And we'll just make some shit up if we have to. Who knows? But either way, there's one way to find out. Check us out all weekend long at profootballtalk.com. Thanks as always for some of your time. We'll see you back here again on Monday. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.